You will not believe what happens to the girl at the end. Make sure to like and subscribe so we can continue writing stories like this one. I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below.
The Legend of Dust Devil Ranch. Dust Devil Ranch wasn't named for its beauty or its bounty. It was named for the swirling vortexes of sand and grit that tormented the land, miniature cyclones that danced across the parched earth like mocking spirits. The sun beat down with merciless intensity, baking the cracked soil until it resembled shattered pottery. Even the cacti seemed to cower, their needles drooping in defeat. The ranch house itself was a study in weathered resilience. Built low and squat, hugging the ground as if afraid of being blown away, it was constructed from sun-baked adobe bricks, their surfaces rough and scarred. The porch sagged under the weight of years, its paint long peeled away, revealing the gray wood beneath. A lone windmill creaked incessantly in the perpetual wind, its blades a rusty symphony of despair. Jedediah Stone was as much a fixture of the landscape as the ranch house, as unforgiving as the desert itself. Stories about him circulated in the nearby town of Redemption, whispers carried on the wind, tales spun in the dim light of the saloon. Some said he'd been jilted at the altar, his heart turned to stone by a woman's betrayal. Others claimed he'd lost his family to a fever, the grief hardening him into a shell of a man. Still others muttered about a dark secret buried somewhere on the ranch, a sin that haunted him and fueled his icy demeanor. Whatever the truth, the result was the same. Jedediah Stone was a man to be feared, or at least avoided. He rarely spoke, and when he did, his voice was a low, gravelly rumble like stones grinding together. His eyes, the color of flint, seemed to pierce right through you, seeing not just your face but your soul and finding it wanting. He demanded absolute obedience from his ranch hands, ruling with an iron fist and tolerating no dissent. Mistakes were met with swift and harsh punishment. Loneliness clung to him like the dust devils that plagued his ranch. He ate his meals in silence, his only companion the mournful howl of the wind. He spent his evenings on the porch, staring out at the vast expanse of desert, his face etched with a profound sadness that few ever saw. The only sign of life, the only warmth in the bleak landscape of Dust Devil Ranch came from the small garden tucked behind the house. It was Maricella's domain. She coaxed life from the unforgiving soil, nurturing vibrant blooms and fragrant herbs. The vibrant colors of her flowers were an anomaly, a splash of defiance against the monochrome backdrop of the desert. Jedediah never acknowledged Maricella's efforts, never complimented her garden or thanked her for the meals she prepared. But Maricela saw him watching her sometimes, his gaze lingering on the vibrant colors, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. One evening, a fierce dust storm raged, whipping sand against the windows of the ranch house with relentless fury. The wind howled like a banshee, tearing at the shutters and rattling the doors. Jedediah sat on the porch, his silhouette a dark outline against the swirling sand. Maricela, despite the storm, ventured out to the garden. Jedediah watched as she struggled to protect her precious plants, shielding them from the wind and sand with her own body. He remained motionless, a statue carved from stone. Later, when the storm had subsided and an eerie calm had settled over the land, Maricela found Jedediah standing in the garden, his boots sinking into the muddy soil. He was staring at a single, broken sunflower, its head drooping towards the ground. Without a word, he reached out and gently righted the stem, propping it up with a small rock. It was a small gesture, barely perceptible, but Maricela saw it. She saw the flicker of humanity beneath the hardened exterior, the yearning for beauty and connection that he tried so hard to suppress. She knew then that the legend of Jedediah Stone, the cold-hearted rancher, was not the whole story. There was something more, something buried deep beneath the layers of pain and grief. And she, perhaps, was the only one who could see it. The air hung heavy with the scent of rain and dust. A lone coyote howled in the distance, its mournful cry echoing across the desolate landscape. Dust Devil Ranch remained a testament to resilience and hardship, a place where even the toughest hearts could be softened if only given a chance. A flicker of warmth. The buckboard rattled to a halt, kicking up a plume of dust that momentarily obscured the already bleak landscape. Maria Flores, perched stiffly on the worn seat, squinted against the sun. Dust Devil Ranch. It looked as desolate as its name suggested. The main house, a sprawling structure of weathered wood and faded paint, seemed to sag under the weight of the unforgiving sky. No vibrant garden here, just parched earth and the skeletal remains of what might have once been a rose bush clinging desperately to the porch. Taking a deep breath, Maria hopped down, her worn leather boots crunching on the gravel. A shiver ran down her spine, not from the chill, the air was thick and heavy with heat, but from a sense of profound loneliness emanating from the place. She untied her small bundle of belongings and, squaring her shoulders, walked towards the house. The front door, a heavy slab of oak, stood slightly ajar. Hesitantly, she knocked, the sound swallowed by the vast emptiness around her. A moment later, a figure filled the doorway. Jedediah Stone. He was taller than she'd imagined, his frame lean and hard, his face etched with lines that spoke of sun, wind, and something far darker. His eyes, the color of flint, assessed her with an intensity that made her want to shrink back. "You're Maria?" His voice was a low rumble, devoid of warmth. "Si, Senor Stone. I am Maria Flores." She clutched her bundle tighter, meeting his gaze with a quiet dignity. He grunted, stepping aside. "Come in. I'll show you your room." The interior of the house was dimly lit and sparsely furnished. Dust motes danced in the shafts of sunlight that pierced through the grimy windows. The air hung heavy with the scent of stale tobacco and something indefinably sad. Maria tried not to let her dismay show. She had seen worse. Jedediah led her down a narrow hallway to a small room at the back of the house. It contained a narrow cot, a rickety dresser, and a small, cracked mirror. The walls were bare. "This is it," he said, his tone flat. "Dinner's at 6. I expect you to be on time. Breakfast at sunup. I expect you to be ready. My clothes need washing, the house needs cleaning, and I want a hot meal on the table every day. Understand?" "Si, Senor Stone. I understand." Maria placed her bundle on the cot. He turned to leave, then paused at the doorway. "I don't tolerate laziness. Or excuses." With that, he was gone, his heavy footsteps echoing down the hall. Maria sighed, a small sound lost in the silence. This was going to be harder than she thought. But she had promised Mrs. Henderson, the kind woman who had helped her find this position, that she would not give up easily. And Maria Flores was not one to break a promise. She unpacked her meager belongings, placing her few dresses neatly in the dresser and hanging her shawl on a hook behind the door. Then she set about tidying the room, straightening the cot, wiping down the dresser, and trying to bring a semblance of order to the small space. Her first task was to tackle the dust. She found a broom and a bucket in a small storage room and began to sweep, her movements methodical and efficient. As she worked, she noticed a small, faded photograph tucked under the dresser. She carefully retrieved it. It was a picture of a young woman with laughing eyes and a bright smile. Who was she? A daughter? A wife? The thought made her wonder about the shadows that haunted Jedediah Stone's eyes. She carefully placed the photograph back under the dresser, leaving it undisturbed. It was not her place to pry. By the time she had finished cleaning her room, her hands were raw and her back ached. But the small space felt cleaner, lighter. A tiny victory in the face of overwhelming desolation. She ventured into the main house, searching for the kitchen. It was a large, cavernous room, dominated by a massive cast-iron stove. The cupboards were bare, the counters grimy. It looked as though it hadn't been properly cleaned in years. Maria rolled up her sleeves and set to work. First, she scrubbed the counters, removing the layers of accumulated grime. Then, she tackled the stove, scouring away the rust and soot. She found a few potatoes and onions in a root cellar outside and began to prepare a simple stew. As she worked, she hummed softly a simple, cheerful tune. The sound seemed to bounce off the empty walls, a small act of defiance against the silence. Jedediah entered the kitchen as she was stirring the stew. He watched her for a moment, his expression unreadable. "What are you doing?" he asked, his voice gruff. "Making dinner, Senor Stone," Maria replied, meeting his gaze. "A simple stew. I hope it is to your liking." He grunted again, his eyes narrowing. "Don't expect any praise from me. Just do your job." "Si, Senor Stone." Maria continued to stir the stew, her movements unhurried and deliberate. She knew that she could not change him overnight. But perhaps with time, with patience, she could chip away at the ice that surrounded his heart. As the aroma of the stew filled the kitchen, a flicker of something akin to warmth seemed to pass through Jedediah's eyes. It was gone in an instant, replaced by his usual guarded expression. But Maria had seen it, and it gave her hope, orders and quiet strength. The next morning dawned with the scrape of Jedediah's boots on the porch, a sound that had Maria stirring even before the rooster's first attempt at song. He didn't bother with a greeting, just barked, "Fire needs stoking. Coffee needs brewing. And I want that damned dust gone from the parlor before sunup hits the east window." Maria, already halfway to the stove, simply nodded. "Si, Senor Stone." The orders came as a torrent each day. Mend fences before noon. Check the south pasture for strays. Prepare a stew hearty enough to feed a pack of wolves. Each command was delivered with the same gruff dissatisfaction, as if Maria was perpetually falling short, though she worked until her bones ached. She moved through the ranch house with a quiet efficiency that seemed to both irritate and intrigue Jedediah. He would watch her sometimes, his eyes narrowed as she scrubbed the floors, her dark hair pulled back in a severe bun. He never offered a word of praise, only more demands. The parlor, a room seemingly untouched by time, was her first battleground. Dust motes danced in the faint morning light, clinging to the heavy velvet curtains and the ornate furniture. She attacked the grime with a vengeance, her small hands wielding a duster like a weapon. The scent of lemon polish filled the air, a stark contrast to the pervasive smell of dust and horses that clung to the rest of the ranch. By the time Jedediah stomped in, the room was gleaming. He ran a callous finger along the mahogany table, finding no fault. "Humph," he grunted, the closest he'd come to a compliment. "See to the chickens. They're laying soft eggs again." Maria found the source of the problem, a cracked trough and a hen with a calcium deficiency. She mixed crushed eggshells into their feed, a remedy her grandmother had taught her, and replaced the broken trough. As she worked, she noticed one of the ranch hands, a young man named Billy, limping as he carried a heavy bale of hay. Later, when she carried lunch out to the men working the fields, she made sure to pack an extra portion of stew and a thick slice of apple pie for Billy. She offered it with a shy smile. "For your leg, Billy. Eat well, get strong." Billy blushed, accepting the offering with a grateful nod. "Thank you, Maria. That's real kind of you." Jedediah, leaning against a fence post, observed the exchange. His expression remained impassive, but a flicker of something unreadable crossed his eyes. He watched as Maria moved among the men, offering water and words of encouragement, her presence a small oasis of warmth in the harsh landscape. That evening, after cleaning up from dinner, Maria found Jedediah sitting on the porch, staring out at the darkening plains. He was nursing a glass of whiskey, the amber liquid catching the last rays of the setting sun. She hesitated, then approached him. "Senor Stone," she began softly, "the south fence needs more than just mending. The posts are rotting. We need to replace them soon, before the cattle stray." He swirled the whiskey in his glass, his gaze never leaving the horizon. "Do what you have to," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "Just don't come crying to me if you break your back." Maria nodded, accepting his gruffness as a challenge. "I will manage, senor." As she turned to leave, she noticed a small, injured bird fluttering near the porch steps. She gently scooped it up, its tiny heart beating rapidly against her palm. Its wing was bent at an unnatural angle. Jedediah watched her, his eyes narrowed. "Put it out of its misery," he said flatly. "It's suffering." Maria looked at the bird, then back at Jedediah, her expression unwavering. "No, senor," she said quietly. "It deserves a chance." She disappeared inside the house, returning a few moments later with a small box and a strip of clean cloth. Working with careful hands, she splinted the bird's wing, her brow furrowed in concentration. She placed the bird gently in the box, lining it with soft cotton. Jedediah watched her every move, his face unreadable. He took a long swallow of his whiskey. "Sentimental fool," he muttered, but Maria pretended not to hear him. She placed the box in a sheltered corner of the porch where the bird would be safe from the elements. As she stood up, she met Jedediah's gaze. There was something different in his eyes, a flicker of something that wasn't quite anger, wasn't quite softness, but something in between. "Good night, senor," she said softly, and went inside, leaving Jedediah alone with his thoughts and the quiet chirping of a tiny, injured bird. Stormbound. The wind started as a whisper, a low moan across the plains that barely stirred the dust devils dancing in the distance. Jedediah, squinting at the horizon from the porch, felt a prickle of unease. The air tasted thick, heavy with electricity. Maria, hanging laundry on the line, paused, her dark hair whipping around her face. She glanced at Jedediah, a question in her eyes. "Get the livestock inside," he barked, already moving towards the barn, "and secure the shutters on the house." Maria nodded, her movements quick and efficient. The wind picked up speed, howling now, bending the cottonwoods double. The sky, a moment ago a brilliant blue, turned a bruised purple. By the time Maria had wrestled the last shutter into place, fat raindrops were splattering against the windows, turning the glass opaque. The storm hit with the force of a runaway train. Lightning cracked, illuminating the landscape in stark, momentary flashes. The ranch house groaned under the assault of the wind. Jedediah, soaked to the bone despite his oilskins, strode into the kitchen, shaking his head. "That's a real toad strangler," he muttered, peeling off his coat. "Looks like we're stuck inside for a while." Maria was already lighting a kerosene lamp, the warm glow pushing back the encroaching darkness. She glanced at him, a flicker of something concern in her eyes. "I'll make some coffee," she said, her voice calm amidst the roaring wind. The coffee was strong and bitter, just the way Jedediah liked it. They sat in silence at the kitchen table, the only sounds the relentless drumming of rain and the occasional crack of thunder. Jedediah watched Maria, the lamplight highlighting the curve of her cheek, the strength in her hands as she held her cup. He found himself wondering about her, about the life she had led before she arrived at Dust Devil Ranch. "Where'd you learn to handle livestock so well?" he asked abruptly, the question surprising even himself. Maria looked up, startled. "My father had a small farm in Mexico," she said, her voice soft. "We raised goats and chickens. Everyone helped." "Lost it, did you?" Jedediah asked, regretting the bluntness of his question as soon as the words were out. Maria's face clouded over, a brief shadow of pain crossing her features. "Yes," she said quietly. "A drought. We lost everything." He grunted, uncomfortable with the sudden vulnerability. He wasn't used to sharing, wasn't used to others sharing with him. He preferred the silence, the solitude. As the storm raged on, hunger gnawed at them. Maria rummaged through the pantry, emerging with a can of beans, some dried beef, and a jar of pickled vegetables. She quickly assembled a simple meal, setting it on the table with a quiet efficiency that both impressed and irritated Jedediah. He was used to fending for himself, to the rough simplicity of his own cooking. Maria's touch, even in something as basic as a meal, felt like an intrusion. They ate in silence, the only sound the clinking of forks against plates. Jedediah found himself watching Maria again, noticing the way she carefully chewed each bite, the way she offered him the jar of pickled vegetables without being asked. Small gestures, acts of quiet kindness that he wasn't sure he deserved. Later, as the storm began to subside, the wind dying down to a whimper, the rain easing to a drizzle, Jedediah found himself restless. He paced the small house, his boots thudding on the wooden floor. "I can't sleep," he said finally, stopping in front of Maria, who was mending a tear in one of his shirts. "Neither can I," she replied, not looking up. He hesitated, unsure of what to say. The silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken words. "Tell me about your father," he said finally, the words a low rumble in his chest. Maria looked up, her eyes searching his face. Then, slowly, she began to speak, her voice soft and melodic, weaving a tale of sun-drenched fields, of hard work and simple joys, of a life lost but not forgotten. Jedediah listened, captivated, the gruff rancher melting away, replaced by a man touched by the beauty and resilience of the human spirit. For the first time since Maria had arrived, he saw her not as hired help, but as a person, a woman with a past, a story, and a strength that rivaled his own. The storm outside had passed, but a different kind of storm, one of understanding and unexpected connection, was just beginning to brew within the walls of Dust Devil Ranch. Ailing and healing. The deluge had subsided, leaving the world sparkling, reborn. Sunlight, splintered by clinging raindrops on the window, cast shifting mosaics across the floorboards. Jedediah, stiff from a restless sleep haunted by the storm's fading roar, discovered Maria already awake, the aroma of brewing coffee a fragrant promise. "Buenos dias," she greeted, her voice a gentle murmur. He grunted, reaching for a mug, the robust scent a sharp jolt to his senses. Fences to mend, damages to tally. The herd would be scattered, unnerved. As he reached for his weathered hat, Maria intervened. "There's a calf. Not well?" He frowned. A common enough burden on the ranch. The frail rarely thrived. Lost its mother in the squall, most likely. It'll find her, eventually. "I don't believe so," she countered, a subtle alarm in her tone. Weak, shivering. "It hasn't stirred from the lower pasture all morning." Jedediah sighed inwardly. Another demand on his stretched time. "All right, I'll have a look." He located the calf exactly where she'd indicated, huddled pathetically beside a sage clump, its breathing shallow and uneven. A young Hereford, barely weaned, its once bright gaze now listless. "Just chilled," Jedediah muttered, more to convince himself. "It'll warm up soon enough." He began to turn back. "Jedediah, please," Maria implored, catching up to him. She knelt, her brow creased with concern. "It needs assistance." Warmth, perhaps some remedy. He scoffed quietly. Medicine? For livestock? It's the way of things, Maria. Some perish, some endure. Can't rescue them all. He recalled the unyielding realities of his youth, the constant battle against the elements, the losses accepted with stoic resignation. Sentimentality was an indulgence he couldn't afford. Maria disregarded his cynicism. Gently, she stroked the calf's head, whispering reassurances in her native tongue. She touched its ears, icy cold. It must be warmed, she stated, her eyes unwavering. I'm taking it to the barn. Jedediah watched, taken aback by her resolve. He'd employed her for domestic tasks, not veterinary interventions. A fool's errand, Maria. It'll likely just expire anyway. Yet, she was already struggling to lift the calf, her slight frame tested by its weight. Wordlessly, Jedediah reluctantly moved, scooping the calf into his arms. It felt unnervingly light, its thin frame fragile against the roughness of his hands. Inside the barn, Maria swiftly fashioned a bed of straw. She sorted through Jedediah's sparse collection of animal treatments, finding a bottle of electrolytes. Arms crossed, Jedediah observed as she coaxed the calf to drink, a few tentative swallows initially, then with growing eagerness. The entire day became dedicated to the calf's recovery. She heated water on the stove, using cloths for heated compresses. Her attention was constant, her touch careful and encouraging. Jedediah, once dismissive, found himself lingering, a silent figure in the dimness of the barn. He noted the unwavering devotion reflected in Maria's eyes, the tenderness in her touch. He hadn't witnessed such selfless care in what felt like a lifetime, perhaps never. As dusk settled, the calf, though still frail, displayed glimmers of recovery. It raised its head, its breathing becoming more rhythmic. Maria smiled, a weary but triumphant smile gracing her face. It will recover, Jedediah, she said, her voice imbued with quiet assurance. It simply required a bit of help. He glanced at the calf, then at Maria, a peculiar sensation stirring within him, a spark of something dormant. Was it simple gratitude? Respect? Something deeper? He couldn't decipher it. Later that evening, seated alone on the porch, the expansive, star-studded sky a vast canvas above, Jedediah pondered Maria and the calf. He reflected on his own harsh pronouncements, his initial lack of concern. He considered the countless instances he'd armored his heart, believing that vulnerability equated to weakness. He wondered if his long-held convictions were flawed. The cool evening breeze carried the faint, earthy aroma of damp soil and the distant calls of the herd. He closed his eyes, the memory of Maria's kind face etched into his mind. He had erected walls around his heart, brick by solitary brick, to shield himself from the world's intrusions. Yet perhaps Maria was dismantling them, one act of compassion at a time. And possibly, just possibly, that prospect wasn't entirely unwelcome. Deception and loyalty. Dust swirled behind the sputtering engine of a Ford Model T as it lurched to a halt in front of the Dust Devil Ranch house. A man with slicked-back hair and a smile as wide and artificial as a painted sunset hopped out, adjusting his checkered suit. "Afternoon, folks. Name's Clarence, and I've got just what you need to make life on this here ranch a whole heap easier." Jedediah, who'd been inspecting a fence line, straightened, his eyes narrowing at the city slicker. He didn't trust anyone who smiled that much. Maria, hanging laundry on the line, paused, her gaze assessing the man with a quiet curiosity. Clarence launched into his spiel, a rapid-fire description of a newfangled irrigation system guaranteed to double crop yields with half the water. He gestured with a flourish to a set of glossy brochures depicting lush green fields and overflowing harvests. "Think of it, friend. No more backbreaking work, just overflowing bounty." Jedediah listened, his expression unreadable. He knew water was life out here, and anything that could improve their efficiency was worth considering. But Clarence's overly enthusiastic delivery and the suspiciously bright pictures made him uneasy. "How much?" Jedediah finally asked, his voice a low rumble. Clarence beamed. "For you, sir, a special price. Just $500, installation included." $500 was a small fortune. Jedediah's jaw tightened. He'd have to sell half his herd to cover that. Maria, who had been subtly inching closer, spoke up, her voice soft but clear. "Senor Clarence, may I see the specifications?" Clarence seemed slightly taken aback by her question. "Specifications? Why, they're all right here in the brochure, ma'am. Easy to understand, even for, well, for anyone." Maria stepped forward and took a brochure. her eyes scanning the diagrams and text. Jedediah watched her, a flicker of surprise in his gaze. He hadn't known she could read technical drawings. She frowned, pointing to a small detail in the diagram. This pump, it says here it requires a well depth of at least 50 feet. Our well is only 35. Clarence sputtered. A minor detail, ma'am. Easily adjusted. I assure you. Maria didn't back down. In this pipe, it is listed as galvanized steel, but the weight is far too light. It must be a cheaper alloy. Clarence's smile faltered. He wiped his brow with a silk handkerchief. Now see here, missy. Jedediah stepped between them, his face like granite. You trying to cheat me, mister? Clarence stammered, his eyes darting around nervously. No, sir. Just a slight miscalculation. A typographical error. Maria held up the brochure, pointing to another discrepancy. And this guarantee, it is only valid if you use their specific brand of fertilizer, which costs twice as much as the usual kind. Jedediah grabbed the brochure and crumpled it in his fist. Get off my land. His voice was dangerously quiet. Clarence, realizing he'd been caught red-handed, scrambled back into his Model T, fumbling with the ignition. The engine coughed and spluttered, finally catching with a roar. He threw the car into gear and sped away, leaving a cloud of dust in his wake. Jedediah watched him go, his anger slowly receding. He turned to Maria, his expression softening slightly. How did you know? Maria shrugged, her eyes downcast. My father, he was a mechanic. I learned a few things from him. She hesitated, then added, I did not want you to be taken advantage of, Senor Stone. Jedediah looked at her, really looked at her. He saw not just a housekeeper, but a woman of intelligence and loyalty. A woman who had just saved him a considerable amount of money. He ran a hand over his weathered face. Thank you, Maria. You did good. He turned and walked back towards the barn, leaving Maria standing by the clothesline, a faint smile playing on her lips. The setting sun cast long shadows across the ranch, and for the first time in a long time, Jedediah felt a flicker of something other than grim determination within him. It was a sense of gratitude, and perhaps something more. He didn't quite understand it yet, but he knew that Maria Flores had changed something on the Dust Devil Ranch, something significant. The prized stallion. The first sign was a subtle tremor in Diablo's powerful frame, a barely perceptible quiver that ran through his dark, muscular haunches. Jedediah, who knew the stallion better than he knew his own reflection, saw it immediately. He stopped mid-stride, his boots sinking slightly into the dusty earth of the corral, and watched with growing concern. Diablo, usually a restless energy contained within a magnificent body, stood listless, his head hanging low. He didn't nicker at Jedediah's approach, didn't even twitch an ear. Jedediah reached out, running a calloused hand down Diablo's sweat-slicked neck. The horse felt feverish. A knot tightened in Jedediah's gut. Diablo wasn't just a horse, he was the culmination of years of careful breeding, a symbol of Dust Devil Ranch's hard-won success. More than that, he was a companion, a silent confidant in the vast solitude of the plains. Maria! Jedediah bellowed, his voice cracking slightly with anxiety. Maria appeared moments later, wiping her hands on her apron. Her brow furrowed as she took in the scene. What is it, Jedediah? What's wrong? He gestured to Diablo, his voice rough. He's sick. Real sick. Maria approached Diablo cautiously, her movements gentle and soothing. She ran her hand along his flank, her touch surprisingly firm and knowing. He's burning up. We need to cool him down. They worked together, a flurry of purposeful activity in the fading light. Jedediah filled buckets with cool water from the well while Maria soaked rags and applied them to Diablo's heaving sides. The stallion remained unresponsive, his breath coming in ragged gasps. As darkness descended, Jedediah's worry deepened into a gnawing fear. He paced the corral, his frustration growing with each labored breath Diablo took. He was used to battling the elements, to wrestling a living from the unforgiving land. But this felt different, a helplessness he hadn't experienced in years. Maria, however, remained calm, a quiet strength radiating from her. She didn't speak much, but her actions were a constant reassurance. She stayed by Diablo's side, tirelessly changing the cooling rags, whispering soft words of comfort in Spanish that Jedediah couldn't understand but somehow found soothing. Hours crawled by. Jedediah offered to take over, to let Maria rest, but she refused. I'll stay with him, she said, her voice firm but laced with exhaustion. You need to get some sleep, Jedediah. You can't help him if you're worn out. He reluctantly agreed, retreating to the house but unable to sleep. He tossed and turned, the image of Diablo's suffering etched in his mind. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of wind sounded like Diablo's weakening breath. He finally gave up trying to sleep and returned to the corral just before dawn. The sight that greeted him stopped him in his tracks. Maria was still there, kneeling beside Diablo, her face pale and drawn in the faint light. But Diablo was standing. He was still weak, his legs trembling slightly, but he was standing. He lifted his head and gave a soft nicker, a sound that sent a wave of relief washing over Jedediah. Maria looked up, her eyes bloodshot but shining with triumph. A tired smile touched her lips. "He's going to be all right," she said, her voice hoarse. Jedediah approached Diablo cautiously, running his hand down his neck once more. The fever had broken. He turned to Maria, his gaze filled with a gratitude he couldn't quite articulate. You saved him," he managed to say, his voice thick with emotion. Maria shrugged, dismissing his praise. "He's a strong horse. He just needed a little help." But Jedediah knew it was more than that. It was her unwavering dedication, her tireless care, that had pulled Diablo through. As the sun rose, casting a golden glow over Dust Devil Ranch, Jedediah saw Maria in a new light. She wasn't just hired help, she was an integral part of the ranch, a vital force that brought strength and resilience to a place that had known only hardship. And as he looked at her, his heart, long hardened by years of solitude, felt a flicker of something warm and unfamiliar. A feeling that went beyond gratitude. A feeling that hinted at a deeper connection he couldn't deny. Temptation and truth. The dust cloud hadn't dissipated after Jedediah dismissed the hired help when a glossy black car, longer than any he'd encountered outside Harmony Gulch, hummed into view. It idled before the porch with a pneumatic sigh, its surface mirroring the afternoon sun like a polished scarab. A woman unfolded herself from within. Her sharp features gained an alluring cast through tailored elegance. The dress, the blue of high-altitude skies, rippled around her, and a generous hat brim cast her face in shadow. Jedediah felt a premonitory clench in his stomach. Trouble was no stranger, yet this arrived in a machine worth more than his cattle. "Mr. Stone?" Her voice, like hammered silver, was cool and exact. "I am Eleanor Ainsworth. I believe we have mutual acquaintances in the business world." Jedediah inclined his head. He remembered her father, a railroad magnate whose smile could freeze desert blooms. "Miss Ainsworth, please, Eleanor will suffice. I've come to propose something unconventional." She indicated the house with a gloved hand, gems winking. "Might we speak inside?" Hesitation flickered across his face, his gaze drifting toward the bunkhouse. Maria would likely be within, starting supper. The place isn't exactly prepared for callers. Eleanor's smile remained fixed. "I assure you, Mr. Stone, I adapt readily. And this discussion requires privacy." Indoors, the air hung heavy with wood smoke mingling with Maria's delicate lavender scent. Jedediah made a vague gesture toward the threadbare sofa. Eleanor's appraisal of the room was swift and critical, her gaze lingering on the peeling wallpaper and dust devils swirling in sunbeams. "Quaint," she offered, the word laced with irony. Forgoing the offered seat, she turned to face him, her cerulean eyes sharp and calculating. "My proposition is simple. I seek a husband. You are self-sufficient, own considerable acreage, and possess a certain virile appeal. A union between us would be mutually advantageous." A flare of anger threatened to ignite, but Jedediah suppressed it. He grasped the essence of her proposal, access to her family's coffers, a life free of hardship, and escape from the ranch's daily grind. It held undeniable allure. "And what is your benefit, Miss Ainsworth?" "Security, social standing, and an heir, naturally. My family anticipates it." She allowed the unspoken to resonate. A generous prenuptial agreement, of course, safeguarding both our assets, would be drawn up. He pictured Maria, her work-worn hands and gentle smile. He recalled her tireless dedication, unwavering fortitude, and devotion to Diablo. He imagined her reaction upon learning of Eleanor's proposal. "I require time to consider," he said, his voice gravelly. "Naturally." Eleanor's smile bordered on predatory. "I am residing at the Harmony Gulch Hotel. I anticipate your response within the week." She pivoted and glided from the house, leaving behind a whisper of costly perfume. Jedediah stood motionless, the silence amplifying the frantic rhythm of his pulse. He moved to the window and watched the black automobile retreat down the drive, a metallic serpent retreating into the realm of privilege. He discovered Maria in her compact room adjoining the kitchen. She was packing her few belongings into a time-worn valise. The descending sun painted long shadows across the space, accentuating the dust motes suspended in the air. "Maria?" She looked up, her eyes swollen. "I overheard," she murmured, her voice a fragile breath. "The woman." He longed to refute it, to reassure her that it was untrue, that he wouldn't entertain the notion. But the words were trapped in his throat. He couldn't deceive her, not after all they shared. She presented an offer, he confessed, the words ringing false even to his own ears. "Marriage." Maria nodded, her expression unreadable. "I understand. She is suitable for a man in your position." "Maria, please, don't," he implored, unsure of the words he wished to utter. "Don't leave? Don't believe I would prefer her?" The words felt inadequate, hollow. She fastened the valise and rose, her shoulders squared. "I will depart in the morning, before her return." He reached out, his hand hovering close to her arm. "Maria, please. Stay. Just stay." She gazed at him, her dark eyes reflecting a sorrow that pierced his soul. "I cannot, Jedediah. It would be wrong. For both of us." She slipped past him, leaving him alone in the cramped room, the scent of lavender a poignant reminder of his potential loss. He recognized he stood at a precipice, confronted with a choice between a life of ease and security and the delicate, uncertain hope of something authentic. The temptation surged within him, a powerful current drawing him towards the shores of affluence, yet truth, like an unshakable anchor, held him firm to the bedrock of his heart. From ashes, love blooms. The smell of smoke, acrid and sharp, ripped Jedediah from sleep. He bolted upright, heart hammering against his ribs. The scent clung to the air, a sinister presence that sent a jolt of primal fear through him. He threw on his boots and burst out of the house, the pre-dawn darkness swallowing him whole. The sight that greeted him stole his breath. Flames clawed at the night sky, consuming the old barn in a ravenous dance. Sparks flew like angry fireflies, carried on the wind towards the dry fields. The heat radiating from the inferno was intense, scorching his face even from a distance. Panic, cold and sharp, threatened to overwhelm him. The barn held winter feed, tools, everything. Losing it would cripple the ranch. Then he saw her. Maria, silhouetted against the orange glow, was already hauling buckets of water from the well, her face grimly determined. "Maria, get back," he yelled, his voice hoarse. She didn't stop. "We have to try, Jedediah. It will spread." He knew she was right. The wind was picking up, carrying embers like tiny, malevolent seeds. He ran towards her, grabbing another bucket. Together, they formed a frantic chain, hauling water, splashing it on the spreading flames, battling the inferno with a desperate energy. The heat was relentless, blistering their skin. Smoke choked them, stinging their eyes and lungs. Jedediah coughed, his vision blurring, but he kept going, driven by a fierce determination to protect his land, his livelihood. And by the sight of Maria, her small frame working tirelessly beside him, her spirit undeterred. He saw her stumble, her face streaked with soot and exhaustion. He caught her before she fell, his hand gripping her arm tightly. "Maria, you need to rest." "No," she gasped, shaking her head. "Not yet." He knew arguing was futile. They returned to their grim task, their movements synchronized, a silent partnership forged in the heart of the chaos. Hours blurred into a relentless cycle of hauling, splashing, and praying. The sky began to lighten, painting the smoke-filled air in shades of orange and gray. Finally, as the sun crested the horizon, painting the sky in hues of hope, the fire began to yield. The flames flickered and died, leaving behind a smoldering ruin, a testament to their struggle. Exhausted, their bodies aching, they stood side by side, watching the last embers fade. The barn was gone, a skeletal frame against the rising sun. But the fields were safe. The house was untouched. They had saved the ranch. Jedediah turned to Maria, his gaze searching her soot-stained face. He saw not just weariness, but strength, resilience, and a quiet courage that humbled him. He reached out, gently brushing a smudge of dirt from her cheek. "You are incredible, Maria," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You saved everything." She looked up at him, her eyes, usually so bright, were shadowed with fatigue, but they still held a spark of something he couldn't name. "We saved it," she corrected softly. "Together." He took a deep breath, the smoky air stinging his lungs. He had a choice to make, a life-altering decision that had been simmering beneath the surface for weeks. He knew what he wanted, what he needed, and it wasn't the gilded cage Eleanor Ainsworth offered. "Maria," he began, his voice rough with sincerity. "I was a fool, Eleanor. That was a mistake. A desperate attempt to hold onto something that doesn't matter. What matters is right here with you." He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs tracing the delicate curve of her cheekbones. "I love you, Maria. I love your strength, your kindness, your spirit. I want to build a life with you right here on this ranch together. A tear trickled down her cheek, leaving a clean streak in the soot. Jedediah. He didn't let her finish. He lowered his head and kissed her, a kiss that was both tender and desperate, a promise of a future built on shared hardship and unwavering love. In the days that followed, the ranch began to heal. Jedediah and Maria worked side by side, clearing the debris, salvaging what they could. Neighbors, hearing of the fire, arrived with offers of help, their faces etched with concern. They rebuilt the barn, stronger and more resilient than before, a symbol of their collective strength. Eleanor Ainsworth's carriage never returned. Her offer, a fleeting temptation, was now a distant memory, replaced by the warmth of Maria's presence, the comfort of her touch, the promise of a future built on love, not convenience. As they worked side by side under the vast Montana sky, Jedediah knew he had finally found what he had been searching for his entire life. It wasn't wealth or status or an easy path. It was love forged in the fires of adversity, a love that would endure, as strong and enduring as the land itself.